On the evening of the 24th of February 1978, 5 friends from Yuba County, California, piled into Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego and drove 50 miles to watch a college basketball game. They were excited about the match between UC Davis and Chico State, but they had another reason to attend. They were planning to compete in a Special Olympics basketball tournament the following week, and watching good teams play was part of their preparation. The 5 men, Ted Weiher, 32, Jack Madruga, 30, Bill Sterling, 29, Jack Hewitt, 24, and Gary Mathias, 25, were close friends who had met through various community programs for individuals with mild intellectual disabilities and psychiatric conditions. Despite their challenges, they lived relatively independent lives, held jobs, and shared a passion for basketball. Their families expected them home that evening, as they always returned from such outings by a reasonable hour. They never made it home. What happened to these 5 men over the following months would become one of California's most perplexing unsolved mysteries, earning the grim nickname America's Dyatlov Pass for the sheer impossibility of understanding how events unfolded. Welcome to Vanishing Threads. Today we're exploring the case of the Yuba County Five, a mystery that has baffled investigators, psychologists, and amateur sleuths for over 4 decades. We'll examine the verified facts, the bizarre circumstances of their disappearance, and the haunting questions that remain unanswered. This is a case where every piece of evidence seems to contradict the others, where logical explanations crumble under scrutiny, and where the truth appears more elusive with each passing year. The basketball game ended around 10 p.m. on that Friday evening. Multiple witnesses confirmed that the 5 men attended the game and were seen together during the match. They appeared in good spirits, discussing their upcoming Special Olympics tournament and making plans for the following week. Security cameras and witness statements placed them leaving the arena together, walking towards the car park where Madruga had parked his Mercury Montego. From this point, their movements become unclear, but what we know suggests something went terribly wrong almost immediately after they left Chico. The first sign of trouble came 4 days later, on 28th of February 1978, when a Forest Service employee discovered an abandoned car on a remote mountain road in the Plumas National Forest. The 1969 Mercury Montego was stuck in snow on a fire trail called Oroville-Quincy Road, approximately 70 miles northeast of Chico and 200 miles from where the men lived. The car was positioned nose first into a snowbank, as if the driver had continued straight when the road curved. What investigators found at the scene defied explanation. The car was in good working condition with nearly a full tank of fuel. The engine turned over normally, and there were no mechanical problems that would have prevented the men from driving home. More puzzling still, the car had been carefully prepared for winter conditions before the trip. The men had installed tire chains, despite the fact that no snow had been forecast for their route to Chico. Inside the car, investigators found the men's personal belongings largely undisturbed. Madruga's wallet contained money and identification. There were no signs of struggle, violence, or distress. The vehicle appeared to have been abandoned voluntarily, as if the 5 men had simply decided to get out and walk away into the wilderness. But this made no sense. The location where the car was found was approximately 50 miles from the direct route home from Chico. To reach this spot, the driver would have had to make a series of deliberate turns onto increasingly remote mountain roads. Local residents familiar with the area stated that it would be nearly impossible to reach this location by accident, even in poor visibility conditions. Furthermore, the men had no known reason to be in this area. None of them were familiar with the Plumas National Forest or the network of fire roads that crisscrossed the region. Madruga, who owned the car, was not an experienced mountain driver. The group had no camping equipment, insufficient clothing for cold weather conditions, and limited food supplies. The search for the 5 men began immediately, but the harsh winter conditions and remote terrain made progress difficult. Snow continued to fall throughout March, covering any potential tracks or evidence. Helicopters and ground crews searched the area around the abandoned car, but found no trace of the men. As winter turned to spring and the snow began to melt, the search expanded. In June 1978, nearly 4 months after the disappearance, searchers finally began to find answers. But these answers only deepened the mystery. On the 4th of June 1978, a group of motorcyclists exploring the forest came across a small trailer that belonged to the Forest Service, located approximately 20 miles from where the car had been found. The trailer was used by personnel working in remote areas and was typically locked and secured. When authorities investigated, they made a shocking discovery. Inside the trailer, they found the body of Ted Weiher. Weiher had apparently been living in the trailer for an extended period before his death. A coroner later determined that he had survived for at least 8 to 13 weeks after the group's disappearance, finally succumbing to starvation and exposure in late May 1978. This survival timeline was extraordinary, particularly given the circumstances investigators discovered. The trailer contained ample food supplies, enough to sustain a person for months. There were canned goods, dried foods, and emergency rations, yet he appeared to have eaten very little of what was available. Additionally, the trailer was equipped with a propane heating system and a stove, but investigators found evidence that these had rarely been used. Weiher seemed to have spent most of his time huddled under blankets, slowly starving, despite being surrounded by resources that could have kept him alive. Even more puzzling, Weiher had lost between 80 and 100 pounds during his ordeal, and his feet showed severe frostbite damage. His behavior during those final months appeared to follow a pattern that psychologists would later describe as consistent with severe depression or catatonic behavior, but this was not typical of his known personality or mental health history. The discovery of additional bodies over the following weeks painted an even more disturbing picture. On the 24th of June 1978, searchers found the remains of Jack Hewitt and Bill Sterling approximately 11.5 miles from the trailer in a heavily wooded area. Their bodies were discovered under circumstances that suggested they had died much earlier than Weiher, likely within weeks of the initial disappearance. Sterling's body showed signs of having been partially consumed by animals, making it difficult to determine an exact cause of death. The location where Hewitt and Sterling were found raised additional questions. They were discovered in an area that would have required considerable effort to reach, involving travel through dense forest and over difficult terrain. There was no clear path or trail leading to their location, and no obvious reason why they would have chosen to travel in that direction. Jack Madruga's remains were found on the same day, approximately 11 miles from the trailer, but in a different direction from Hewitt and Sterling. His body was located near a small creek, and like the others, showed evidence of exposure and starvation. The positioning of his body suggested he had been attempting to find water when he died. Gary Mathias, the fifth member of the group, was never found. Despite extensive searches covering hundreds of square miles of forest, no trace of him has ever been discovered. He remains listed as a missing person, and in October 2020, the Yuba County Sheriff's Department officially declared him to be a victim of foul play. The discovery of the 4 bodies answered some questions, but raised many more. Autopsy reports confirmed that all 4 men had died from a combination of starvation and exposure, but their physical condition suggested they had survived for varying lengths of time after leaving the car. The pattern of their deaths and the locations where they were found seemed to indicate they had separated at some point, each attempting to find their way to safety or shelter. But why had they left the car in the first place? And how had they become so thoroughly lost in an area that was only 50 miles from civilization? Investigators developed several theories, none of which fully explain the evidence. The first theory suggests the men became lost due to a navigation error. Proponents of this theory argue that the driver, likely Madruga, may have taken a wrong turn while leaving Chico, possibly due to poor visibility or confusion about road signs. Once they realized they were lost, they may have continued driving deeper into the mountains, hoping to find a way out. When the car became stuck in snow, they decided to abandon it and walk, believing they could find help or a main road. This theory has some merit, but it struggles to explain several key facts. The route from Chico to the location where the car was found requires multiple deliberate turns onto increasingly remote roads. It's not a single wrong turn, but a series of decisions that led them deeper into the wilderness. Additionally, the men had lived in the area their entire lives and were familiar with the local geography, making such a significant navigation error seem unlikely. The second theory involves foul play. Some investigators have suggested that the men encountered someone who forced them to drive to the remote location, possibly with the intention of robbing them. According to this theory, the perpetrator may have abandoned the men in the wilderness, expecting them to die of exposure. This theory would explain how the men ended up so far from their intended route and why they abandoned a functioning vehicle. However, there was no evidence of violence at the car, no indication that valuables had been taken, and no signs of struggle. The men's behavior after abandoning the car, particularly Weiher's extended survival in the trailer, doesn't align with the expected actions of people who had been victims of a violent crime. A third theory focuses on the mental health challenges faced by some members of the group. Mathias had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had a history of medication non-compliance that could lead to psychotic episodes. Some investigators have suggested that Mathias may have experienced a mental health crisis that influenced the group's decisions. This theory proposes that Mathias may have convinced the others to drive to the mountains for reasons that seemed logical to him, but were actually symptoms of a psychotic episode. His influence over the group could explain why they made such unusual decisions and why they continued into increasingly remote areas. While this theory addresses some aspects of the case, it still doesn't fully explain the evidence. The other four men, while having mild intellectual disabilities, were capable of independent decision-making and had never shown signs of being easily manipulated. Additionally, if Mathias was experiencing a psychotic episode, it's unclear why he would have been able to coordinate such a complex series of driving directions. A fourth theory, less favored by investigators, but persistent in popular discussions of the case, suggests some form of unknown encounter in the wilderness. This theory encompasses various possibilities, from encounters with hostile individuals living off-grid to unexplained phenomena. Proponents point to the seemingly irrational behavior of the men and the difficulty in explaining their actions through conventional means. However, this theory lacks any supporting evidence and is generally dismissed by serious investigators as speculation based on the case's unusual aspects rather than facts. The investigation into the Yuba County Five case has continued sporadically over the decades, with periodic reviews as new forensic techniques become available. In recent years, investigators have used advanced mapping technology and satellite imagery to re-examine the terrain where the men disappeared, hoping to identify areas that may not have been thoroughly searched in 1978. DNA analysis has been conducted on evidence from the scene, but has not yielded new leads. The passage of time has made it increasingly difficult to pursue new investigative avenues, as potential witnesses have aged or died and physical evidence has degraded. The case has attracted attention from amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts, leading to numerous theories and proposed solutions. Online communities have analyzed every aspect of the case, from weather records for the night of the disappearance to detailed topographical studies of the area. While these efforts have provided interesting insights, none have definitively solved the mystery. The families of the five men have continued to seek answers, participating in periodic media coverage and supporting renewed investigative efforts. They have established that their loved ones were not the type of people to deliberately venture into dangerous wilderness areas and maintain that something specific must have happened to cause such unusual behavior. Dr. Maurice Kilgore, a forensic pathologist who worked on the case, observed that the men's survival patterns in the wilderness were inconsistent with their known personalities and capabilities. Ted Weiher, who survived the longest in the trailer, had always been described as someone who followed routines and sought comfort and security. His behavior in the trailer, failing to use available food and heating resources, seemed completely contrary to his character. The case has been studied by psychologists and behavioral analysts as an example of group decision-making under stress. Some have suggested that the men may have entered a state of collective panic or confusion that impaired their judgment. However, this doesn't fully explain the extended timeline of their survival or their apparent separation in the wilderness. Weather records from February 1978 show that conditions in the Plumas National Forest were harsh but not unprecedented. While there was snow at higher elevations, temperatures were not extreme enough to cause immediate death from exposure. This supports the evidence that the men survived for weeks or months after abandoning the car, but raises questions about why they were unable to find safety despite having considerable time to do so. The geographic area where the events took place has been mapped and analysed extensively. The location where the car was found is accessible by a network of Forest Service roads that are typically used by personnel and experienced off-road drivers. The roads are not marked with standard street signs, and there are numerous intersections that could confuse unfamiliar drivers. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case is the condition of the Forest Service trailer where Ted Weiher was found. The trailer had been forced open, indicating that the men or someone else had broken in rather than finding it unlocked. This suggests deliberate action rather than accidental discovery. Additionally, the trailer was not visible from any road or trail, meaning someone would have had to search specifically to find it. The fact that Weiher survived alone in the trailer for months raises questions about what happened to his companions. If they had all reached the trailer together, why did Weiher remain while the others left? If they had separated earlier, how did Weiher alone find the trailer? The physical evidence suggests that other people may have been at the trailer, but forensic analysis from 1978 was not sophisticated enough to definitively determine how many people had been present or when. The case has been compared to other mysterious disappearances and survival stories, but few share the same combination of puzzling elements. The Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia, which occurred in 1959, has some superficial similarities. A group of people abandoning safety and dying in harsh conditions, but the circumstances are quite different. The Yuba County Five case is unique in its combination of survival timeline, available resources, and the apparent inability of capable adults to find their way to safety. Modern survival experts who have reviewed the case note that the area where the men disappeared, while remote, is not so isolated that experienced hikers couldn't find their way out within a few days. The forest contains numerous trails, roads, and landmark features that could guide someone to civilization. The fact that the men were unable to navigate out of the area suggests either that they were incapacitated in some way or that they were prevented from leaving by circumstances that are not evident in the surviving evidence. The seasonal timing of the disappearance has also been a subject of analysis. February is typically one of the most challenging months for travel in the Sierra Nevada foothills due to snow and ice conditions. However, the men had prepared for winter driving by installing tire chains, indicating they were aware of potential weather challenges. This preparation suggests that their journey into the mountains may not have been entirely unplanned or accidental. Recent technological advances have opened new possibilities for understanding the case. Satellite imagery and GPS mapping have provided more detailed information about the terrain and potential routes the men could have taken. Ground-penetrating radar and other detection equipment have been used to search for any trace of Gary Mathias, but his fate remains unknown. The psychological aspects of the case continue to intrigue mental health professionals. The behavior exhibited by the men, particularly their apparent inability to use available resources for survival, is not typical of people with mild intellectual disabilities. Studies of similar populations indicate that individuals with their conditions generally retain strong self-preservation instincts and the ability to seek help when in danger. The case has influenced discussions about search and rescue procedures and the challenges of finding missing persons in wilderness areas. The initial search efforts in 1978 were hampered by weather conditions and the vast area that needed to be covered. Modern search and rescue techniques, including thermal imaging and GPS-guided searches, might have yielded different results, but these technologies were not available at the time. The ongoing mystery of the Yuba County Five represents more than just an unsolved case. It's a reminder of how much we still don't understand about human behavior under extreme stress and the limitations of our ability to reconstruct events from physical evidence alone. Despite decades of investigation and analysis, the core question remains unanswered. What caused five friends returning from a basketball game to drive deep into a remote forest and ultimately lose their lives? The families of Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, Bill Sterling, and Gary Mathias continue to hope for answers. While the chances of solving the case diminish with each passing year, the mystery remains an active investigation. The Yuba County Sheriff's Department still accepts tips and information about the case, particularly regarding Gary, who has never been found. The case serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly normalcy can turn to tragedy, and how the wilderness can transform from a place of recreation to one of mortal danger. It also highlights the importance of understanding and supporting individuals with intellectual disabilities and mental health challenges, ensuring they have the resources and support systems needed to navigate crisis situations. Perhaps most importantly, the Yuba County Five case demonstrates the enduring power of human compassion and the need to remember those who have been lost. These 5 men were not just statistics in an unsolved case file, they were beloved family members, friends, and community members whose lives had value and meaning beyond the circumstances of their deaths. As we continue to seek answers to this 47-year-old mystery, we honor their memory by refusing to forget their story and by maintaining hope that one day we might finally understand what happened on that February night in 1978 when 5 friends drove into the mountains and never came home. Thanks for tuning in. As always, stay curious, stay safe.